2 days after the wedding, the air still held the scent of roses from the backyard archway where vows were exchanged. Preston Weaver sat across from his daughter and her new husband at Golden Oaks, a cozy restaurant known for its low lighting and velvet booths. Candlelight flickered gently between them, bouncing off the wine glasses and half-eaten plates of roast chicken and steamed asparagus. Everything looked perfect. But the words that followed turned the air cold. "Lillian and I need our own place to start our family properly," Philip said, swirling his wine casually as if he were discussing dessert. "Your house would be perfect for a young couple." Preston blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The fork paused in his hand, cake still sweet on his tongue. He placed it down slowly. 2 days ago, he had paid $15,000 for the wedding, every flower, every bite of food, every note from the string quartet. And now his new son-in-law was casually suggesting he hand over the very home he had built with his wife Margaret 20 years ago. "That's my home," Preston said evenly, though his fingers curled against the edge of the table. His voice remained calm, but beneath it simmered disbelief. Lillian shifted uncomfortably between them. Her wedding ring caught the candlelight, casting a glint across the white tablecloth. Other diners laughed softly at nearby tables, lost in their own celebrations, unaware that a quiet battle was taking shape just feet away. "But you're just one person in such a large house," Philip continued with that same fixed smile. "It's not really practical, is it? And at your age, wouldn't you prefer something more manageable?" Preston's jaw tensed. At your age, 68 was not ancient. He still mowed his own lawn, fixed his own plumbing, and shoveled his own driveway when the snow came in hard Chicago winters. The champagne flute trembled slightly as he set it aside. "We'd take such good care of it," Philip added, reaching across to squeeze Lillian's hand. "Think about it, your grandchildren playing in those rooms someday." Lillian's eyes darted nervously between the two men. "Dad, Philip, please don't fight. It's supposed to be a happy day." Happy. The word rang hollow. Preston's mind flashed back to the joy on her face when he gave her the check for the wedding reception, the smile when she first tried on her dress. He had wanted her to have a perfect day, to feel loved, supported, and now this. "Philip," Preston said slowly, straightening in his seat, "at my age, I'm still strong enough to make decisions about my own property. You and Lillian are welcome to stay for a few more days while you look for your own place, but this home stays mine." For the first time, Philip's expression flickered, just for a moment. Something cold passed behind his eyes, like the shadow of a shark beneath still water. But then the charm returned, all smiles and nods. "Of course, Preston, I understand completely," he said, but his tone had sharpened, ever so slightly. "It's just," he added, "with rental prices the way they are, and with Lillian's teaching salary—" "We'll manage," Lillian interrupted softly, squeezing his hand, but Preston caught the hesitation in her voice. Philip's jaw tightened for a heartbeat before relaxing again. "I was just hoping we could discuss it as family. After all, what's the point of holding on to such a valuable asset when it could benefit all of us?" Asset. Not a home. Not the place where he and Margaret brought their daughter home from the hospital. Not the space where every picture frame on the wall told a story. Preston looked down at the tablecloth, the candlelight casting warm shadows across a wilted centerpiece from the wedding. "No," he said firmly. "Find your own place." Philip leaned back in his seat. The smile turned brittle. "We can discuss it again later, when emotions aren't running so high." Emotions. As if standing up for the home he had built was an overreaction. Lillian's face folded inward, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. "Maybe we should go home," she murmured. Home. She meant his house. The one where Philip had already started poking around the heating system, asking questions about property taxes and neighborhood values. Preston pushed back from the table. His cloth napkin slid to the floor unnoticed. The air in the restaurant felt suddenly thick. He stood, reaching for his wallet, pulled out 2 crisp $20 bills, and dropped them on the table with more force than necessary. "Take care of the check," he said. "I need some air." Philip's voice followed as Preston turned toward the exit. "We'll talk about this later, Preston, when you've had time to think it through properly." He didn't look back. Outside, the spring air bit at his face. The wind held a slight chill, but it was clearer than anything inside that booth. He took a deep breath, trying to still the storm that had begun to churn in his chest. His car sat parked under the soft glow of a streetlight, waiting. The weight of Philip's words hung on his shoulders like a winter coat. He climbed in and closed the door. As he turned the key in the ignition, his hands trembled. Not with age, but with the first flickers of something colder than the night air. Suspicion. And something else, too. Resolve. The next morning brought no peace. Preston stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warming his hands, watching sunlight crawl across the backyard. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place that had once echoed with Lillian's laughter and Margaret's humming. Now, silence only magnified the question that refused to leave his mind. What kind of man asks for your house 2 days after marrying your daughter? He took a sip, but the coffee tasted bitter. Something about the previous night's dinner had unsettled him beyond the words themselves. There was something in Philip's tone, entitlement wrapped in charm, urgency hiding behind politeness. It wasn't just a suggestion, it had been a calculated move. The knock at the front door startled him. He opened it to find Seal Brown, his neighbor and friend of nearly 20 years. Seal wore his usual gardening gloves and had the look of a man who carried something more urgent than weed advice. "Morning, Preston," Seal said, glancing over his shoulder toward the street. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Of course," Preston nodded, stepping aside. "Come in." They moved to the living room. Seal remained standing, his expression shifting from casual to concerned. "Yesterday afternoon," Seal began, "your son-in-law came by. He wasn't alone." Preston raised an eyebrow. "Some guy in a suit," Seal continued. "Had a briefcase, some kind of scanner or measuring tool. They were walking the perimeter of your yard. Spent a lot of time by the fence, taking notes, snapping pictures." Preston's stomach tightened. "Did they go inside?" Seal nodded slowly. He had keys. The coffee mug in Preston's hand suddenly felt like it weighed 10 pounds. "I didn't think much of it at first," Seal added. "Figured you were selling the place. But the way they were working, it felt professional. Not like a family thing. Like an appraisal." Preston's jaw set. "Thank you, Seal. This is very important." Once Seal left, Preston set his coffee down and walked straight to his study. The quiet in the room was now hostile. He powered on his desktop computer. While the machine hummed to life, he opened his desk drawer and retrieved the worn leather journal Margaret had given him after his retirement. "For all those ideas rattling around in your head," she'd written on the first page. He flipped to a blank page and dated it, March 2025. Then he began to write. Philip Green brought unknown mail to property. Suspected appraisal activity. Lillian unaware. Intentions unclear but concerning. The computer finished booting, and Preston opened the browser. He navigated to the search history and froze. The list hit like punches to the ribs. Property appraisal services, Chicago suburbs, fast home sale companies, real estate law, elderly homeowner transfer, Illinois, power of attorney forms, fraud protections for senior citizens. Each entry was more damning than the last. Philip hadn't just talked about taking the house, he had researched how to do it legally. Preston sat back, his heart pounding, not in panic, but in calculation. The engineer in him began to take over. Patterns, data, process, problem solving. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. He picked up the phone and dialed Edward Lloyd. Edward Lloyd's office, a receptionist answered. "This is Sandra." "This is Preston Weaver," he said, voice tight. "I need to speak with Edward. It's urgent. Real estate fraud. My son-in-law is trying to take my house." The line went silent for a second. "Hold on, sir. I'll get him right away." Edward came on moments later, voice laced with concern. "Preston, talk to me." Preston walked him through everything. Philip's comment at dinner, Seal's observation, the search history. When he finished, Edward was quiet. Then his voice dropped into something lower, colder. Preston, I have 3 active cases involving Philip Green, different states, same pattern. Preston's blood ran cold. He marries into families with elderly parents, Edward continued, builds trust, gains access to financial records, files false documents, claims the property is his through power of attorney or forged sale agreements. Preston gripped the edge of the desk. Are you telling me he's done this before? Yes, and you're his next target. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Preston barely noticed. What do I do? He asked. First, don't confront him yet. We need evidence. Do you have a safe? Yes. Behind Margaret's portrait. Combination lock. Good. Keep all property records there. Deed, will, insurance, bank statements. Do not sign anything. And Preston. Yes? You're in immediate danger. He moves fast. We need to be faster. Preston ended the call and stared at the blank monitor. The window beside him reflected a weary but focused face. A man who had built a life one measured decision at a time. Now he was being measured like an old fence, evaluated for resale. But not today. He opened the safe and began organizing documents. Property deed, updated will, investment records. He moved with steady hands, each page laid out like pieces of a map leading to the truth. Later that night, he sat with a glass of whiskey, watching the shadows shift across the yard. The same yard where he had taught Lillian how to ride a bike. The same porch where Margaret once read books in the afternoon sun. This wasn't just a house. It was his legacy. And someone had come to steal it. But they had underestimated the man sitting in the dark, watching them come. The house was quiet again, but Preston no longer trusted the silence. He moved through each room slowly that morning, not as a homeowner enjoying his space, but as a man preparing a battlefield. He had vacuumed beneath furniture, dusted bookshelves, straightened picture frames. It started as a nervous habit, but soon turned into something more intentional, a mental reset before the storm. It was when he lifted the ceramic bowl on the living room table that he noticed it. A glint. A shape that didn't belong. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Wedged behind the bowl, half concealed by its curve, was a tiny black lens, no bigger than a button. Preston froze. Not because he didn't know what it was, but because he knew exactly what it was. A camera. Motion activated. High quality. Professionally placed. His heart beat harder, but not in panic, in confirmation. Philip had been watching him. He fetched a small screwdriver from the garage and removed the device carefully, preserving its wiring and the micro SD card tucked inside. Back in his study, Preston inserted the card into an adapter and plugged it into his computer. The folder opened slowly. 47 video files. His breath caught. He clicked the first one. The screen filled with an image of himself, sitting in the same living room chair, talking on the phone to his insurance agent. His voice was clear. The video, sharp. He clicked through the next few files, clips of him reading, paying bills, making coffee. Then he found it, file number 38. Philip stood in the center of the living room, phone pressed to his ear. The old man is completely trusting, he said, laughing. By the end of the month, the house will be ours. The documents are almost ready. Preston's jaw tightened. He turned up the volume. Richard, are you sure the notary seals will hold up? Last time we almost got flagged, Philip said. A muffled voice replied, presumably Richard's. These elderly targets sometimes surprise you, but this one? He's exactly like the others. Proud, independent, but soft underneath. Philip chuckled. He actually paid 15 grand for our wedding. Made it so easy to look legitimate. Preston paused the video. His hands didn't shake. Not anymore. He backed up the entire folder onto multiple drives. USB, cloud, even an old external hard drive from his engineering days. Then, he picked up his phone and called Edward. I have video, Preston said. Audio. Him and the notary, discussing everything. There was a long pause on the line. Then Edward spoke in a steady, focused tone. This changes everything. I'm calling Detective Sarah Miller. She's been tracking Philip across multiple states but never had enough evidence to move forward. Until now. Later that afternoon, as sunlight slanted across his desk, Preston clicked through more files. He listened to Philip's rehearsed charm, watched him study Preston's documents when he was out, even heard him laugh while mimicking Preston's voice. In one clip, Philip looked directly at the hidden camera, unaware it was his own trap turned against him. Lillian will never believe her precious daddy over her loving husband, he said. She's the perfect cover. Preston leaned back, the weight of betrayal pressing into his spine. His daughter, used as a shield, a decoy, not just emotionally, but strategically. But Philip had made a critical mistake. He had forgotten who Preston Weaver truly was. A man who built bridges, who solved structural failures under pressure, who understood redundancy, data integrity, and failure points. That night, Preston changed every pin. He called his bank and added fraud alerts. He scheduled a meeting with his financial advisor. He set up an emergency protocol with his insurance company. He photocopied his deed, will, and financial records again. He checked every room for more surveillance and found another camera, this one tucked behind the bookcase in his study. He removed it without a word. He didn't rage. He didn't panic. He prepared. 3 days remained until Philip's planned move, the day the documents would be ready, when the friendly notary would return to finalize the paperwork. Preston poured himself a modest glass of whiskey and stood in front of the fireplace. A photo of Margaret smiled from the mantel. She had always said he over-prepared, that he worried too much, but she also trusted him to protect what mattered. He lifted the glass slightly in her direction. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a new number. "Chicago Police Department," the operator answered. "I need to speak with Detective Sarah Miller," Preston said calmly. "Tell her it's about Philip Green, and that I have evidence." From the outside, the house looked no different. Same white shutters, same flower beds, same swing on the front porch that Preston had repaired twice since Margaret passed. But inside, every room had changed. Not in appearance, but in purpose. Each bookshelf now hid a camera. Each lamp base, a microphone. What was once a home had become a controlled environment, engineered for one thing only: evidence. Preston stood in the center of his living room, arms crossed, watching Detective Sarah Miller direct her team like a conductor with a quiet symphony. No barking orders, no slamming drawers, just methodical efficiency. One officer adjusted a lens inside a wall vent. Another checked the feed from a small laptop in a rolling case. "Visuals clean," the tech whispered. "Living room, kitchen, hallway, all covered." Sarah looked at Preston. "You doing okay?" He nodded. "This feels strange, letting strangers into my house, but necessary." "You're doing more than most people your age ever could," she replied. "Most people freeze when they realize they've been targeted. You went straight to strategy." "I'm not most people," Preston said simply. The corner of her mouth lifted. "No, you're not." The team left minimal trace of their presence. No wires visible, no microphones dangling. Everything wireless, synced to the van parked 3 houses down, disguised as a cable repair truck. Seal Brown had volunteered his driveway and a hot pot of coffee for the team. Retirement had not dulled the old man's sense of justice. In the study, Preston and Sarah sat down to review the plan one final time. "Philip will come in with a man named Richard Fox," Sarah began. "We've confirmed he's impersonating a notary. He's used this identity before. Once the documents are presented, you ask polite questions. Don't confront. We need them to speak openly." "I understand," Preston said. "And if they don't?" Sarah gave a slight shrug. "If they clam up, we'll still arrest them. But if they slip, if they say something that proves intent, it's stronger, cleaner in court." Preston tapped the arm of his chair. "I can do that." She handed him a small, flat button, no larger than a coin. "When you're ready, press and hold this for 2 seconds. It alerts the entire team. We'll be through the door in less than 30. Preston turned the device over in his hand. It looked like something you'd keep on a keychain, but it was power, quiet, direct, decisive. Sarah stood and offered her hand. "Be careful, Mr. Weaver." He shook it firmly. "I will, and thank you." That night, the house returned to stillness. But this time, Preston didn't mind. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, even the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, all of it felt purposeful. He was ready. He sat by the fireplace and opened Margaret's journal. Not the one for legal notes, but the one she used to keep recipes and grocery lists. On the inside cover, in her handwriting, it said, "The home is not the walls. It's the choices made inside them." He smiled faintly. Upstairs, he changed into a button-down shirt and slacks. He laid out the documents Edward had prepared. The real deed, the notarized will, the folder clearly labeled with his name. A small hidden microphone rested beneath the table where the meeting would take place. At 5 in the morning, he brewed a pot of coffee, double-checked every camera angle with Sarah's tech team, then sat in the same living room chair where Philip had once mocked him, unaware that Preston would one day use his own recordings against him. Outside, the van blinked with quiet activity. A second unmarked car parked across the street. Seal stepped out of his house, nodded once toward Preston's window, then ducked back inside. Everything was in place. At 4:57 in the afternoon, Preston stood at the window and watched a sleek gray sedan pull up to the curb. Philip stepped out first, dressed sharp, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. He walked with the confidence of a man certain of a victory already won. Richard followed, thinner, balding, carrying a briefcase and a polished smile. Preston turned away from the window and walked slowly to the living room, the same pace he had always used when greeting guests. He sat in his chair, folded his hands in his lap, and took a steady breath. "Showtime," he whispered. The knock came exactly at 5 o'clock. Preston rose from his chair with a steady breath and walked toward the front door. He paused only once, brushing his hand along the side table where the silent panic button sat waiting beneath a coaster. Then he opened the door. Philip stood there in a navy blazer, smile sharp and confident. Beside him was Richard Fox, his thin face stretched into what he must have thought passed for warmth. He carried a black briefcase and a leather-bound folder tucked under his arm. "Preston," Philip said, as if they had agreed on this meeting long ago. "Hope we're not too early." "You're right on time," Preston replied, stepping aside. "Come in." They entered like salesmen, all polished shoes and empty charm. Philip made a show of admiring the living room. "Always liked this place," he said, glancing at the fireplace. "Feels like home already." Richard gave a small laugh and opened the folder. "Let's get started, shall we?" Preston led them to the coffee table, where he had already set out 3 glasses of water and a small stack of his own documents. He sat across from them, hands folded neatly. "Now," Richard said, clearing his throat, "we have the agreement here. It reflects a full voluntary transfer of ownership from you to your daughter, with your blessing, of course." He laid out the papers, sliding one across the table. Philip leaned forward, smile unwavering. "We thought it would be better for everyone. Lillian and I can handle the maintenance. You'd be free to relax, maybe travel, spend time in warmer places." Preston picked up the top sheet and scanned it. It looked official, columns, signatures, a notary stamp. But even at first glance, it was wrong. His signature, faked. The property value, wildly understated. And the notary seal, dated the day before their wedding. Preston looked up slowly. "You're suggesting I've already signed this?" Philip's expression flickered, just for a second. "Well, it was discussed. I thought perhaps—" "It wasn't," Preston said. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "If you'd prefer to re-sign, I have the documents here." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a duplicate set. Preston set the forged paper down carefully. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "You two seem very sure I won't question this. Why is that?" Philip's smile thinned. "Because it makes sense, Preston. You live alone in a house that's too big. You've said yourself you're thinking of downsizing." "I said I was thinking," Preston replied. "Not handing over my home without compensation. Not forging my own signature." Richard coughed, reaching for his pen. "No one's forging anything. We're here to help, really." Preston leaned forward. Do you know what this house is to me? He asked quietly. It's not just wood and brick. It's where I raised my daughter, where I buried my wife's memory in every corner. You come in here, lie to me, and expect me to thank you? Philip's eyes narrowed. Preston, you might want to lower your voice. Preston tilted his head. Or what? The room went silent. Philip leaned back, jaw clenched. I've done everything to make this transition easy. You're acting irrationally. Irrational, Preston repeated. Because I won't hand over my life to a stranger with a charming smile. Richard stood abruptly. We should go. No, Philip said firmly. We're finishing this. I promised Lillian this would be done before the weekend. Preston didn't respond. His hand slid under the coaster and pressed the button. 2 seconds. That was all it took. In the next instant, the front door burst open and 3 plainclothes officers entered with practiced calm and authority. Detective Sarah Miller was at the front, badge raised. Philip Green, Richard Fox, you are under arrest for attempted real estate fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Philip stood, stunned. What the? You can't be serious. Hands where we can see them, another officer ordered. Richard raised his hands, already pale. I didn't touch anything. He called us. No, Preston said clearly, rising to his feet. You walked in here with forged documents and a camera hidden in my living room. Philip's eyes flashed. You senile old man. Sarah stepped between them. We have video, audio, and eyewitness statements. You'll have your chance to speak in court. Cuffs clicked. Richard didn't resist. Philip did. This is a mistake. Lillian will never believe you, he shouted. You're nothing but a bitter old fool. Preston stood firm. I'm a father who protects his home and his daughter, even if it's from her husband. Philip was dragged toward the door, still cursing, still fighting. Richard followed, silent and broken. Sarah paused beside Preston. You did good. You were calm, composed. I had help, he said, and a lot of motivation. She smiled. We'll see you in court. And then they were gone. The house returned to silence. Preston looked around the room. The cameras would be removed. The microphones packed up. But for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt earned. The courtroom was quiet as Preston stepped up to the witness stand. He moved carefully, but without hesitation, dressed in a gray suit that Margaret had picked for him years ago. For when you need to look like you still run the world, she had once said. Today, it felt just right. The judge, a firm-eyed woman with silver streaks in her hair, gave him a nod. Mr. Weaver, the prosecutor began, can you tell the court how you first suspected something was wrong? Preston cleared his throat gently, his voice calm but firm. It was at dinner, 2 days after the wedding. Philip, the defendant, suggested I give him my home, not asked, suggested, as if it was already his. He continued recounting the cameras, the documents, the fake notary, the betrayal, the quiet planning, the late-night video that captured Philip's voice mocking him, and finally, the sting operation. Every word he spoke was deliberate, not bitter, but honest. A man speaking not to punish, but to protect. Across the room, Philip sat with arms folded, his once slick hair now dulled by weeks in custody. Richard Fox sat beside him, head bowed. Their defense had fallen apart by the second day of trial, when Detective Sarah Miller played the surveillance video for the court. I paid $15,000 for our wedding, Philip had said in the recording. Made it so easy to look legitimate. That single line had drawn audible gasps from the gallery. Preston finished his testimony with one sentence. I loved my daughter enough to stay silent for a long time, but I loved her more than enough to speak when it mattered. He stepped down. Lillian watched him from the gallery, eyes red but dry. She had not spoken to Philip since his arrest. She had testified tearfully that she never knew what he was planning, that she believed her father over her husband, even when it broke her heart. The trial lasted 5 days. On the final afternoon, the jury filed back into the room, The foreman, a man in his 50s, stood and read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Philip Green, guilty of real estate fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." A breath escaped the room. Preston closed his eyes for a moment. The judge's gavel fell. "Philip Green, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Richard Fox, for your cooperation, you are sentenced to 3 years and restitution." Philip didn't speak as he was led away. No insults, no smug looks, just silence. After the hearing, reporters gathered outside. Preston stepped out into the late spring sun, a soft breeze rustling the flags above the courthouse steps. One reporter approached with a microphone. "Mr. Weaver, how did you outsmart a man half your age?" He smiled gently. "I didn't outsmart him. I paid attention. That's all." The reporter chuckled. "What do you plan to do next?" Preston looked out over the street where Lillian stood waiting by the car. She gave him a small wave, the same kind of wave she gave him as a little girl when he picked her up from school. "I plan to go home," he said. And he did. Back at the house, the cameras were gone, the wires pulled, the microphones removed. What remained was wood, brick, and quiet strength. Lillian helped him cook dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup like when she was a child. They ate on the porch, watching the sun dip below the trees. "Dad?" she asked quietly. "Thank you for protecting me, even from what I didn't see." He placed his hand over hers on the table. "That's what parents do." She nodded. "I'm going to be okay." "I know," Preston said. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, he leaned back in his chair. The weight on his shoulders finally lifted. Margaret's photo sat by the window, catching the soft orange light of dusk. The home was still his, but more importantly, so was his peace. The house stood quiet again, its walls no longer hiding microphones or secrets, only memories. There was no music, no dramatic closing line. Just Preston sitting on his porch, the sun falling slow behind the oak trees, and the quiet breath of a man who had walked through fire and come out not bitter, but whole. He didn't set out to be a hero. He didn't storm through the front door or shout from the rooftops. Instead, he listened. He paid attention. And when the time came, he stood tall with dignity, not anger, and defended not just his home, but the quiet truth of who he was. A father, a husband, a man worth far more than the world ever guessed. This story is not just about fraud or legal battles. It is about something older, deeper, and far more familiar to many of us. It is about being overlooked, dismissed, treated like time has passed us by. But when Preston stood against betrayal, he reminded us that character is not measured in how loud we speak, but how steady we stand. He reminded us that wisdom, quietly carried, can still light the darkest corners. At its heart, this story is a call to all of us, especially those of us with silver in our hair and decades in our hearts, not to fade quietly into the background, but to rise with grace when something worth protecting is threatened. Because dignity is not loud. Justice doesn't always wear a badge, and sometimes truth comes not from those with the most power, but from those with the most patience. Just like the small light left on by a farmhouse window, a quiet act of courage can guide us through the longest nights. It may not make headlines, but it may save someone's home, someone's trust, or even someone's soul. So wherever you are tonight, on your porch, by your radio, or with a cup of coffee in hand, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself what you still believe in, what you would still stand up for, even if the world told you to sit down. And if this story touched something inside you, even just a little, consider passing it along. Not for the sake of the story, but for the sake of someone else who might need to remember that strength does not retire. Integrity doesn't expire. And sometimes, the most underestimated among us are exactly who the world needs most.